Rain hammered against the windshield of Ethan Walker's old pickup truck as he sat motionless in the parking lot of a grocery store. The neon sign above the entrance flickered weakly through the darkness. It was nearly midnight. Most of the town of Cedar Creek, Texas, was asleep. Ethan wished he could sleep too. Instead, he sat staring at the steering wheel. Thinking. Remembering. Hurting. The bank would take his house in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. After that, everything he had left would be gone. The house wasn't much. An aging one-story building with peeling paint and a leaking roof. But it was where Sarah had lived, where Sarah had laughed, where Sarah had drawn pictures on the refrigerator door. And now even that would disappear. Ethan closed his eyes. The memories came immediately. They always did. Sarah running through the backyard. Sarah riding her bicycle. Sarah sitting on his shoulders during church picnics. Sarah smiling. Always smiling. Until the illness came. The doctors called it a rare neurological disorder. At first, it seemed small. A few headaches. A little dizziness. Then came the hospital visits. The medications. The surgeries. The prayers. So many prayers. Every night Ethan knelt beside his daughter's bed. Every night he begged God for a miracle. Every night he promised anything. Everything. Just let her live. Please. But miracles never came. Sarah died on a cold October morning. 8 years old. And something inside Ethan died with her. 10 years had passed since then. 10 years. Yet the pain felt fresh. Like an open wound that refused to heal. The funeral had been the beginning of the end. His marriage collapsed 2 years later. His wife, Rebecca, moved to Arizona. Neither of them blamed the other. Grief had simply crushed everything between them. Then the construction company where Ethan worked went bankrupt. The jobs disappeared. The bills multiplied. Life became one long struggle. And through it all, Ethan's faith slowly vanished. Not all at once, piece by piece, prayer by prayer, disappointment by disappointment, until there was nothing left. He no longer attended church. He no longer opened a Bible. He no longer believed anyone was listening. The rain intensified. Ethan started the truck. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't sit there any longer. The engine growled to life. The headlights cut through the darkness. The road stretched ahead. Empty. Silent. Lonely. Much like his life. 20 minutes later he found himself driving toward the northern edge of town, toward a place he hadn't visited in years. St. Michael's Church. The old stone building stood atop a hill overlooking Cedar Creek. Its stained glass windows glowed softly in the storm. Ethan slowed. Then stopped. For several moments he sat staring at the church. "What am I doing?" he muttered. He almost drove away. Almost. But something held him there. Something he couldn't explain. Eventually he stepped out into the rain. The cold water soaked through his jacket immediately. He climbed the stone steps. The wooden door stood slightly open. Inside, the sanctuary was quiet, warm, peaceful. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar. Candles flickered near the front. For a moment Ethan was overwhelmed by memories. Sunday mornings. Christmas services. Sarah sitting beside him, holding his hand, asking endless questions. "Dad, do angels really have wings? Dad, can God hear everybody at the same time? Dad, what does heaven look like?" He swallowed hard. The memories hurt. He sat in the very last pew. Head lowered. Hands clasped together. Not in prayer, just exhaustion. A voice suddenly broke the silence. "Some people come here looking for God." Ethan looked up. An elderly man stood near the altar holding a broom. "Others come here because they've run out of places to hide." Ethan recognized him immediately. Pastor Benjamin. Older now, much older. His hair had turned completely white. But his eyes remained kind. "Ethan," the pastor smiled gently. "It's been a long time." Ethan nodded. Double quotes. "Yeah." Benjamin walked over and sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt strangely comfortable. Finally the pastor asked, "How have you been?" Ethan laughed bitterly. The sound echoed through the church. "You really want the answer?" Benjamin nodded. "I do." Ethan stared at the floor. "My life is falling apart." The words came easier than expected. Maybe because nobody had asked in a long time. "Lost my job." He paused. "Losing my house." Another pause. "Lost my faith years ago." Benjamin listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging. Just listening. Ethan appreciated that. Finally he looked at the pastor. Tell me something. Benjamin nodded. All right. Why did God let Sarah die? The question hung heavily in the air, a question Ethan had carried for 10 years. Question that had poisoned his heart. Benjamin didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the stained glass window depicting Jesus calming a storm. Then he sighed softly. I don't know. Ethan frowned. What? I don't know. The pastor repeated calmly. Ethan shook his head. You're a pastor. Yes. Aren't you supposed to have answers? Benjamin smiled sadly. Not all of them. The rain tapped against the windows. Ethan felt anger rising. People always say God has a plan. Benjamin remained silent. I hate that answer. Ethan's voice grew louder. My daughter died. The words trembled. My little girl died. He stood suddenly. Tears forming in his eyes. And everyone kept telling me God had a plan. His fists clenched. What kind of plan requires an 8-year-old child to suffer? The church fell silent. Only the storm outside remained. Benjamin slowly rose to his feet. Then he said something Ethan never expected. I asked the same question. Ethan froze. What? My wife died 30 years ago. Benjamin's voice was calm. Breast cancer. Ethan stared at him. The pastor continued. I prayed every day. His eyes glistened. I begged God to save her. The old man looked toward the altar. But she died. For a moment neither spoke. Two men connected by loss. Separated by belief. United by pain. What happened then? Ethan asked quietly. Benjamin smiled. I got angry. The answer surprised him. Very angry. The pastor chuckled softly. I yelled at God. You, oh yes. Benjamin nodded. I told him exactly what I thought. Despite himself, Ethan almost smiled. Then what? Benjamin looked toward the cross hanging above the altar. I kept living. The answer seemed too simple. That's it. No. Benjamin shook his head. I kept noticing things. What things? People. The pastor sat back down. Neighbors bringing food. Friends helping with bills. Strangers showing kindness. He folded his hands. Pain convinced me God had abandoned me. Benjamin paused, but kindness kept appearing. The pastor's eyes met Ethan's, so eventually I asked myself a different question. What question? What if God hadn't abandoned me? Silence, heavy silence. Benjamin continued. What if he was helping me through people instead? Ethan looked away. He wasn't convinced, not even close. But something about the old man's honesty affected him. No easy answers. No empty promises. Just truth, just pain, just faith. When Ethan finally left the church, the rain had weakened, a light mist drifted through the darkness. The town was nearly deserted. He climbed into his truck and started driving home. For several miles he thought about Benjamin's words. Then suddenly his headlights illuminated a figure standing beside the road. A child. Ethan immediately slowed. The boy couldn't have been older than 12. His clothes were soaked. His face looked terrified. Ethan pulled over. The boy hesitated. Then approached the truck. Ethan lowered the window. You okay, kid? The boy shook his head. No, sir. His voice trembled. I can't find my mom. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. What's your name? Lucas. Where do you live? The boy pointed vaguely toward the woods. I don't know exactly. That answer worried Ethan. Very few houses existed near this road, and none were close. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Lucas was shivering uncontrollably. Ethan made a decision. Get in. The boy hesitated. Then climbed into the passenger seat. The heater blasted warm air. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Ethan asked, How long have you been out there? Lucas looked down. A few hours. A few hours. The boy nodded. Fear filled his eyes. Something wasn't right. Not at all. And Ethan had no idea that stopping for this frightened child was about to change everything. Not only Lucas's life, but his own. The journey that would lead him back toward faith had begun. And neither of them knew it yet. For several minutes, neither Ethan nor Lucas spoke. The windshield wipers moved back and forth across the glass. Rain continued to fall outside. Ethan glanced at the boy. Lucas looked exhausted. His clothes were soaked. Mud covered his shoes. Something about him seemed deeply troubled. Where's your mother? Ethan finally asked. Lucas stared at his hands. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? The boy swallowed hard. We were living in a trailer outside town. And she left this morning. Ethan frowned. Left? Lucas nodded. She said she'd come back. His voice became quieter, but she never did. A painful silence filled the truck. Ethan suddenly understood. The boy had been abandoned, maybe not intentionally. Maybe something had happened, but whatever the reason, Lucas had been alone all day. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. He remembered Sarah. He remembered how vulnerable children were, how much they depended on adults. No child should ever be standing alone in a storm. "Do you have any relatives?" Ethan asked. Lucas shook his head. "No." "What about friends?" "No." Ethan sighed. He couldn't simply leave the boy somewhere. He couldn't ignore him, but he wasn't exactly in a position to help anyone. His own life was falling apart. Yet something inside him wouldn't let him drive away. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe it was something else entirely. He wasn't sure. "Okay," Ethan said. "We'll figure this out." Lucas looked up. For the first time, a small amount of hope appeared in his eyes. "Really?" "Yeah." The boy smiled slightly. It wasn't much, but it was the first smile Ethan had seen all night. And strangely, it made him feel better too. An hour later they arrived at Ethan's house. The old home stood alone near the edge of town. Its paint was faded. The porch light barely worked. The roof needed repairs. But it was warm. And dry. Lucas looked around nervously as he stepped inside. "You live here alone?" "Yeah." The boy nodded. Ethan grabbed a towel from the bathroom. "Go dry off." Lucas obeyed. Then Ethan found some old clothes that no longer fit him. They were too large for the boy, but better than soaking wet clothing. Soon Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table eating a bowl of chicken soup. He devoured it like someone who hadn't eaten all day. Ethan watched quietly. "Slow down." Lucas looked embarrassed. "Sorry." "When was the last time you ate?" The boy thought for a moment. "Yesterday." Ethan nearly dropped his spoon. "Yesterday." The realization hit him hard. Lucas wasn't just lost. He had been neglected for a long time. The boy continued eating. After finishing the soup, he leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he looked safe. For the first time, he looked like a child. Ethan suddenly noticed how tired he was. Lucas's eyelids were already drooping. "You can sleep in the guest room." The boy looked surprised. "You sure?" "Yeah, thank you." Ethan nodded. Lucas stood. Then stopped. "What?" The boy hesitated. For the first time, he looked like a child. Ethan suddenly noticed how tired he was. Lucas's eyelids were already drooping. "You can sleep in the guest room." The boy looked surprised. "You sure?" "Yeah, thank you." Ethan nodded. Lucas stood. Then stopped. "What?" The boy hesitated. Something about this night felt different. For the first time in years, he wasn't focused on his own problems. For the first time in years, someone needed him. And strangely, that mattered. The next morning, Ethan awoke to the smell of pancakes. He immediately sat up. "Pancakes?" He walked into the kitchen. Lucas stood on a chair trying to cook. The scene almost made Ethan laugh. "What are you doing?" Lucas jumped. "I wanted to help. You nearly burned down my house." The boy looked horrified. Ethan chuckled. "Relax." Lucas grinned. The smile transformed his face. For a moment he looked like any normal 12-year-old. A child who should be worrying about school and baseball. Not survival. Not abandonment. Not storms. They ate breakfast together. Then Ethan contacted the local sheriff's office. Within a few hours, an investigation began. And fortunately, the news wasn't good. Authorities couldn't locate Lucas's mother. Nobody knew where she had gone. No relatives could be found. No emergency contacts existed. Lucas had effectively disappeared from the system. The sheriff, Tom Reynolds, sat across from Ethan in the living room. "We'll keep searching." Ethan nodded. "And until then," Tom sighed, "the boy may need temporary placement." Ethan understood what that meant. Foster care. Lucas sat quietly nearby, listening. Fear appeared in his eyes. Ethan remembered that look. He had seen it on Sarah's face during hospital visits. The fear of uncertainty. The fear of being alone. Tom stood. "We'll know more in a few days." After the sheriff left, silence returned. Lucas stared at the floor. "Are they going to send me away?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't know." The boy's shoulders slumped. Something inside Ethan twisted painfully. He looked around the empty house, the quiet rooms, the lonely walls, the memories. Then he looked at Lucas. And suddenly a thought appeared. A crazy thought. A dangerous thought. A life-changing thought. Maybe the boy didn't need another stranger. Maybe he needed a home. Ethan immediately pushed the idea away. Impossible. He was losing his house. He could barely support himself. How could he help a child? It made no sense. Yet the thought refused to leave. That evening Ethan drove into town for groceries. As he loaded bags into his truck, he noticed St. Michael's Church across the street. Without thinking, he found himself walking toward it. Pastor Benjamin was watering flowers near the entrance. "Back again?" the pastor asked with a smile. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe." Benjamin noticed the concern on his face. "Something bothering you?" Ethan laughed. "Everything." The pastor waited. Eventually Ethan told him about Lucas. The storm. The abandoned boy. The investigation. The possibility of foster care. Benjamin listened carefully. When Ethan finished, the old pastor smiled. "Sounds like you've been busy." "I'm serious." "So am I." Ethan crossed his arms. "I can't help this kid." "Why not?" "I'm broke." "Maybe." "I'm losing my house." "Maybe." "I don't even know what I'm doing with my own life." Benjamin nodded. "That's true." Ethan stared at him. "You're not helping." The pastor laughed. Then his expression softened. "Ethan, what? When was the last time you felt needed?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was obvious. Years. It had been years. After Sarah died and Rebecca left, nobody truly needed him anymore. He had simply existed. Working. Sleeping. Surviving. Nothing more. Benjamin continued. "Sometimes God heals broken hearts by giving them someone else to care for." Ethan immediately looked away. "I told you. I don't believe anymore." The pastor smiled gently. "That doesn't stop him from believing in you." The words lingered in Ethan's mind long after he left. 3 days later, everything changed. Sheriff Reynolds arrived unexpectedly. His expression was serious. Lucas sat on the couch. Ethan stood nearby. Tom removed his hat. "We found the mother." Hope flashed across Lucas's face. Then Tom continued. "She died in a car accident 2 days ago." The room became completely silent. Lucas stared at him. Not understanding. "What?" Tom swallowed. "I'm sorry, son." The boy's face went pale. "No." Tears filled his eyes. "No." The sheriff lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Lucas stood abruptly. "She died in a car accident 2 days ago." The room became completely silent. Lucas stared at him. Not understanding. "What?" Tom swallowed. "I'm sorry, son." The boy's face went pale. "No." Tears filled his eyes. "No." The sheriff lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Lucas stood abruptly. Not anger. Not grief. Not despair. Something else. Something he thought had died long ago. Hope. Because no matter what happened next, one thing had become clear. Lucas was no longer just a boy he found in a storm. He had become part of Ethan's life, and neither of them would ever be the same again. Lucas didn't leave his room for 2 days. He barely ate, barely spoke. Most of the time, Ethan could hear him quietly crying through the bedroom wall. The sound brought back memories Ethan had spent years trying to bury. The hospital room, machines, Sarah's final days. The helplessness, the unbearable silence afterward. Every time he heard Lucas crying, it felt as though the past was reaching through time and touching him again. On the 3rd morning, Ethan knocked gently on the bedroom door. No answer. He knocked again. Lucas, still nothing. Slowly, he opened the door. The boy sat on the floor beside the bed, his knees pulled against his chest, his eyes red from crying. Ethan entered quietly. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally Lucas whispered, "She's really gone, isn't she?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah." The boy lowered his head. "She promised she'd come back." The words shattered Ethan's heart. Children believed promises, even when adults broke them. Especially then. Ethan sat beside him. "I know." Lucas wiped his eyes. "No, you don't." The words weren't angry, just sad. "You don't know what it's like." Ethan stared at the floor. Then he took a deep breath. "My daughter died." Lucas slowly looked up. Ethan had never spoken those words to him before. 10 years ago. The room became quiet. "Her name was Sarah." Lucas listened. Ethan continued. "She was 8. The boy's eyes widened. That's young. Yeah. For a moment, Ethan smiled sadly. She loved drawing pictures. Really, all the time. Lucas glanced toward the window. What happened? The question hurt. It always did. But somehow. For the first time in years, Ethan answered. He told Lucas everything. The illness, the hospital, the prayers, the funeral, the anger, the years of loneliness. When he finished, neither spoke. Finally, Lucas said something unexpected. She would have liked you helping people. Ethan blinked. What, Sarah? The boy shrugged. She would have liked that you helped me. The statement hit Ethan harder than he expected, because deep down, he knew Lucas was right. Sarah had always cared about everyone, even when she was sick. Even when she was afraid. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. For the first time in 10 years. The memory of his daughter didn't bring only pain. It also brought warmth. A tiny spark. A tiny light. Maybe healing had finally begun. The following week brought more bad news. A letter arrived from the bank. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 14 days. Ethan stared at the paper. 14 days. After that, the house would no longer belong to him. The timing couldn't have been worse. Lucas needed stability. The following week brought more bad news. A letter arrived from the bank. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 14 days. Ethan stared at the paper. 14 days. After that, the house would no longer belong to him. The timing couldn't have been worse. Lucas needed stability. Ethan sighed. Yeah. Lucas stared at the ground. If I wasn't here, things would be easier. Immediately Ethan shook his head. No. But no. Lucas looked surprised. Ethan turned toward him. Listen to me. The boy remained silent. You are not a problem. The words came naturally. More naturally than Ethan expected. You hear me? Lucas nodded. But Ethan wasn't sure he believed it. Many abandoned children blamed themselves. Many carried guilt they didn't deserve. Ethan understood that. Because for years, he had blamed himself for Sarah's death. Pain often lied to people. It convinced them they were responsible for things beyond their control. And those lies could last a lifetime. A few days later, Pastor Benjamin invited both of them to a community event at the church. At first Ethan refused. Then Lucas convinced him. The church parking lot was crowded. Families gathered together. Children played games. Volunteers served food. Music filled the air. For the first time in years, Ethan felt strangely out of place. But Lucas immediately blended in. Within minutes he was laughing with other kids. Running. Playing. Being a child. Ethan hadn't seen him this happy since the accident. Pastor Benjamin appeared beside him. Looks like he's having fun. Ethan nodded. Double quotes. Yeah. The old pastor smiled. And what about you? I'm surviving. Benjamin laughed. That's progress. As they watched the children, a woman approached. She introduced herself as Emma Carter, the school teacher. Friendly. Kind. Warm smile. She had volunteered at the church for years. Lucas accidentally crashed into her while running. Instead of getting angry, she laughed and helped him up. The boy immediately liked her. So did everyone else. As the afternoon continued, Ethan found himself talking with Emma. Then talking more. Then laughing. Actually laughing. Strange feeling. A forgotten feeling. For years, he had isolated himself from everyone. Now, for the first time, someone was slowly breaking through the walls he had built around his heart. He didn't notice it, but Pastor Benjamin certainly did. The old pastor smiled to himself. Sometimes healing happened one conversation at a time. That night, after returning home, Ethan discovered something unexpected. A small cardboard box hidden in the attic, covered in dust. He opened it carefully. Inside were Sarah's belongings. Drawings. Letters. Photographs. Memories. Thousands of memories. At the bottom of the box sat a small notebook. Ethan frowned. He had never seen it before. Slowly, he opened it. His heart nearly stopped. It was Sarah's journal. And on the very first page, written in childish handwriting, were words that would change everything. Words he had never read before. Words that seemed impossible. Words that felt as though they had been waiting 10 years for him to discover them. The message began, Dear Dad, if you're reading this someday, I want you to remember something. Ethan stared at the page, his hands trembling. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, his world was about to change forever. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table. The old notebook rested in front of him. For several moments, he couldn't move. His hands trembled. His heart pounded. 10 years. 10 years had passed since Sarah's death, and somehow he had never found this journal. Slowly, he turned the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Small, neat, childlike. Sarah single quotes S handwriting. Tears immediately filled his eyes. He began reading. Dear Dad, if you're reading this someday, I think it means I'm probably in heaven. Don't be sad when you read this. I know you will be anyway, because you're my dad, and dads worry about everything. But I want you to know something. I am not scared. Ethan stopped reading. Lump formed in his throat. He remembered the hospital, the fear, the uncertainty. The endless tests. Yet Sarah had always seemed calmer than everyone else, even calmer than the adults. He continued. The doctors look worried a lot. Mom cries when she thinks I don't see her. Sometimes I hear people talking outside my room. I know. They think I'm asleep, but I'm not. I know I'm sick. Ethan wiped away tears. His vision blurred. I asked Jesus to help Mom and Dad. Not me. I asked him to help you, because I think you're more scared than I am. A tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. Then another. Then another. For years he had carried guilt, pain, anger. Yet his daughter had been praying for him. Even while she was dying. He continued reading. If I go to heaven first, promise me something. Don't stop helping people. Don't stop being kind. And don't stop believing that God loves you. Because he does, even when bad things happen. Ethan lowered the journal. He couldn't continue. That room spun. 10 years. 10 years he had spent blaming God, running from God, rejecting God. And all that time, his daughter's final wish had been the exact opposite. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lucas stood in the doorway. You okay? Ethan quickly wiped his eyes. Lucas looked concerned. You're crying. Ethan laughed quietly. Yeah. Lucas approached. What is it? Ethan handed him the notebook. It's something Sarah wrote. The boy carefully read a few lines. His expression softened. She sounds nice. Ethan smiled. She was. Lucas looked back at the page. I think she loved you a lot. The statement was simple. Honest. True. And for the first time in many years, Ethan allowed himself to remember Sarah without immediately collapsing under grief. For the first time, the memory brought comfort, not just pain. The next morning, Ethan continued reading the journal. Page after page revealed thoughts he had never known. Sarah wrote about heaven. About her dreams, about school. About her parents. But one passage stood out. It had been written only days before her death. Sometimes I wonder why people get sick. Asked Pastor Benjamin. He told me he doesn't know, but he said God can make beautiful things grow even from sad places. I like that. Maybe someday Dad will help someone because of me. Maybe someone will feel less alone. That would make me happy. Ethan stared at the words, then slowly looked toward the hallway where Lucas slept. A strange feeling settled over him, because Sarah's words sounded almost prophetic. Maybe helping Lucas wasn't an accident. Maybe finding him that night wasn't random. Maybe there was a purpose he couldn't yet understand. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself wondering whether Benjamin had been right. Maybe God hadn't abandoned him. Maybe he simply hadn't recognized the ways God had been working. 3 days later, another challenge arrived. Sheriff Reynolds returned, this time with paperwork. He sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table. There's something we need to discuss. Ethan nodded. Tom glanced toward Lucas. The boy sat quietly nearby. Until a permanent solution is found, Lucas will remain under temporary supervision. Ethan understood. Then Tom surprised him. The social worker asked a question. What question? Tom smiled. Would you consider becoming his guardian? The room became silent. Lucas looked up immediately. Hope flashed across his face. Then fear. Fear of rejection. Ethan felt his heart racing. Guardian. The word carried enormous weight. Responsibility. Commitment. Sacrifice. Everything he had avoided for years. I don't know. Tom nodded. Double quotes. No pressure. But Ethan knew there was pressure. Not from the government. Not from the church. Not from anyone else. From his own heart. Because deep down, He already knew the answer. He just wasn't ready to say it. That weekend, Ethan visited Sarah's grave. For the first time in nearly a year, the cemetery overlooked a small field. Wildflowers grew around the headstones. The sky was clear. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. Lucas stood nearby. Respectfully silent, Ethan knelt beside the grave. His fingers brushed across Sarah's name. For several moments he said nothing. Then quietly, he spoke. "Hey, sweetheart." The words felt strange. It had been a long time. "I found your journal." His voice cracked. "I should have found it sooner." The wind whispered through the trees. "I was angry." A tear rolled down his cheek. Angry for a long time. He lowered his head. "I thought God abandoned us." His voice trembled. "I thought he abandoned you." Lucas remained silent behind him. Listening. Ethan looked at the sky. Then continued. "But maybe I was wrong." The words surprised even him, because he meant them. For the first time, he truly meant them. A sense of peace settled over him. Not answers, not certainty. Peace. And after 10 years, that felt like a miracle. The following Monday, disaster struck. A large envelope arrived from the bank. Ethan already knew what it contained. Final foreclosure approval. The house would officially be seized within 10 days. 10 days. After that, he and Lucas would have nowhere to go. That evening Ethan sat alone in the living room. The letter resting on his lap. The future looked impossible. He couldn't save the house. He couldn't afford legal help. He couldn't see a way forward. For a moment, the old hopelessness returned. The darkness, the despair. The familiar voice whispering that nothing would ever change. Then another voice interrupted. "Lucas, can I sit here?" Ethan nodded. The boy sat beside him. "What happened?" Ethan showed him the letter. Lucas read slowly, then looked up. "You're going to lose the house, probably." The boy was quiet. Then he asked, "Are you scared?" Ethan almost laughed. "Very." Lucas nodded. "So am I." The honesty made Ethan smile. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucas said something unexpected. "Pastor Benjamin says fear gets louder when hope gets quieter." Ethan looked at him. "That's surprisingly wise." Lucas grinned. "I know." Then his smile faded. "But I think Sarah would have told us not to quit." The room became silent. Ethan stared at the boy. Then at the journal lying nearby. Then at the foreclosure notice. Slowly, he folded the letter, set it aside, and took a deep breath. Because for the first time in years, he realized something important. The future was uncertain. The problems were real. But he wasn't facing them alone anymore. And somehow, that changed everything. Far outside the house, a black SUV slowly pulled onto the road. Its headlights switched off. The driver remained hidden in the darkness. Watching. Waiting. Inside the vehicle sat a woman holding an old photograph. A photograph of Sarah. And Ethan Walker. The woman stared at the house. Tears filled her eyes. After a moment she whispered, "I finally found him." And then she stepped out of the vehicle. Ethan barely slept that night. The image of the woman standing outside his house remained in his mind. Who was she? Why did she have a photograph of Sarah? And how had she found him? The questions followed him into the morning. Just after sunrise, a knock echoed through the house. Lucas looked up from the breakfast table. Ethan froze. Another knock. Slow and deliberate, he walked toward the front door. When he opened it, the woman stood there. She appeared to be in her early 40s, dark hair, kind eyes, and nervous expression. For several moments, neither spoke. Then she held out the photograph. Ethan's breath caught. It was an old picture, one he had not seen in years. Sarah sat smiling on his shoulders during a church picnic. The edges were worn with age. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. The woman swallowed. "My name is Rachel Bennett." Ethan stared at her. The name meant nothing. Yet something about her face felt strangely familiar. "I think we need to talk." A few minutes later, Rachel sat at the kitchen table. Lucas remained quietly nearby. Rachel held a coffee cup with both hands. As though trying to steady herself. "I've been searching for you for years." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Rachel looked at the photograph, then at him. "Because of Sarah." The room became silent. Ethan's heart began racing. "What about Sarah?" Rachel took a deep breath. 10 years ago, my daughter was dying." Ethan remained still. Rachel continued. She needed a very rare medical treatment. Tears appeared in her eyes. We couldn't afford it. Her voice broke. I thought I was going to lose her. Ethan listened carefully. Something about the story felt important. Rachel reached into her purse. She removed an old envelope, yellowed with age, carefully preserved. You've never seen this before. She handed it to him. Ethan looked at the handwriting. His heart nearly stopped. It belonged to Sarah. The room blurred. What is this? Rachel smiled sadly. A letter. A letter. Rachel nodded. Sarah wrote it for my daughter. Ethan stared at her. Confused. Impossible. My daughter never knew you. I know. Rachel wiped away a tear. But she knew about Emily. Emily, my daughter. Slowly, Rachel explained. Years ago, St. Michael's Church had organized a fundraiser for several sick children in nearby counties. One of those children had been Emily Bennett. At the time, Sarah herself was already battling illness. Yet when she learned about another child who was suffering, she insisted on helping. Despite being only 8 years old. Despite being gravely sick. Despite everything. Rachel smiled through tears. Sarah donated her birthday money. Ethan felt his throat tighten. What? Every dollar? Rachel nodded. She told the church she wanted another little girl to have a chance. The room fell completely silent. Ethan could barely breathe. He remembered that birthday. Sarah had asked for fewer presents. At the time he hadn't understood why. Now he did. Rachel continued. The fundraiser grew. People kept donating. Your daughter inspired them. Tears streamed down her face. The treatment saved Emily's life. Ethan lowered his head, overwhelmed. 4 years he had focused on Sarah's death, never realizing how many lives she had touched before. She died. Rachel pointed toward the letter. Read it. Slowly, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside sat a single folded page. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. He unfolded it carefully, then began reading. Dear Emily, I heard you're sick too. I'm sick too. Sometimes being sick is scary, but Pastor Benjamin says we're never alone. I pray for you every night. I hope you get better. And if you do, promise me something. Help somebody else someday. That way the kindness keeps going. Love, Sarah. The room became quiet. No one spoke. Not Ethan. Not Lucas. Not Rachel. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock in the kitchen. Finally Rachel smiled. My daughter carried that letter everywhere. A tear rolled down her cheek. She still does. 2 hours later, Rachel brought someone else to the house. A young woman stepped from the SUV, perhaps 18 years old. Healthy. Confident. Alive. Rachel introduced her. This is Emily. Ethan stared. For a moment he couldn't speak, because Sarah should have been 18 now. And suddenly, standing before him, was a young woman who existed partly because of Sarah's kindness. Emily approached carefully, then surprised him. She hugged him, without warning, without hesitation. Ethan stood frozen. Then slowly hugged her back. I owe my life to your daughter. Her voice trembled. No, Ethan whispered. You don't. I do. Emily shook her head. My mom told me everything. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted to meet you for years. Lucas watched quietly from the porch. Something about the moment moved him deeply, because for the first time, he saw proof that one person's kindness could outlive them, even after death, even after years. Sarah was gone, but her love wasn't. That afternoon, Rachel revealed another surprise. One that would change everything. She reached into her purse. Again. This time she removed a folder. I didn't come here just to tell you about Sarah. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Rachel slid the folder across the table. Open it. Inside were legal documents, financial records. Bank statements. Ethan looked confused. Then Rachel explained. For the past 10 years, Emily had shared Sarah's story during charity events. Church gatherings. Fundraisers. Community programs. Thousands of people had heard about the little girl who gave away her birthday money while fighting for her own life. The story spread. People donated. Lives were helped. Scholarships were created. Children received treatment. Families received support. The movement became known as Sarah's Light Foundation. Ethan stared at the documents. Speechless. Rachel smiled. Your daughter changed more lives than you know. His hands trembled. Why are you showing me this? Rachel took a deep breath. Because the foundation belongs to Sarah's legacy. She paused. And we've chosen someone to lead it. Ethan suddenly understood. No, Rachel nodded. Double quotes, yes, no. I can, you can. Ethan shook his head repeatedly. I'm not qualified. Rachel smiled. Maybe. I'm broke. Maybe. I don't even know what I believe anymore. Rachel's eyes softened. Maybe that's exactly why. The room became silent. For years Ethan had believed Sarah's story ended in a hospital room. Now he was discovering it had only begun there. Late that evening, after Rachel and Emily left, Ethan sat alone on the porch. The sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. Lucas joined him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally Lucas asked, "Do you think Sarah knew?" Knew what? How many people she would help? Ethan smiled sadly. No. Lucas looked toward the sky. I think she'd be happy. So do I. The boy was quiet. Then he added, I think she'd be proud of you too. Ethan stared into the distance. For years he had carried guilt, regret, failure, but tonight something felt different. The weight seemed lighter. The darkness seemed less overwhelming. Maybe because hope had finally returned. Maybe because God had been working all along. Or maybe because Sarah's love had never truly left. As the stars appeared overhead, Ethan felt something he had not felt in over a decade. A prayer. Small, fragile, uncertain, yet real. He lowered his head and whispered softly into the evening air. God, the word felt unfamiliar, but not impossible. Thank you, far away. Pastor Benjamin sat alone in the church sanctuary. A gentle smile crossed his face. Though he could not hear Ethan's prayer, somehow he felt it. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive in thunder. Sometimes they arrive one step at a time, one person at a time. One broken heart at a time. And Ethan Walker's miracle had only just begun. The next morning felt different. For the first time in years, Ethan woke up without the familiar weight of despair crushing his chest. The problems were still there. The foreclosure notice still sat on the kitchen counter. The bills still needed to be paid. The future was still uncertain, but something had changed. Hope had returned. And hope changes everything. As sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Ethan found Lucas already awake. The boy was drawing. What are you working on? Ethan asked. Lucas quickly covered the paper. Nothing, Ethan laughed. That means it's definitely something. Lucas grinned. Maybe. For a moment, Ethan was reminded of Sarah. She used to do exactly the same thing. Hide her drawings until they were finished, then proudly reveal them. The memory brought a smile instead of pain. That alone felt miraculous. 3 days later, Ethan traveled to the office of Sarah's Light Foundation. The building wasn't large, but it was filled with photographs. Families. Children. Volunteers. Lives changed. 3 years of kindness. Rachel gave him a tour. Every hallway contained reminders of Sarah's legacy. Ethan struggled to believe it. All these years, while he had been drowning in grief, his daughter's story had continued inspiring people. Rachel stopped beside a wall covered in photographs. Look, Ethan stepped closer. Dozens of children, some smiling, some standing beside their families, some holding signs that read, "Thank you." Rachel pointed. Every one of these children received help because of the foundation. Ethan felt his eyes fill with tears. Sarah did this. Rachel nodded. She started it. Then she smiled. And now we want you to continue it. The responsibility felt enormous. Terrifying. But for the first time, Ethan didn't immediately run from it. That evening, Sheriff Reynolds arrived unexpectedly. His expression was serious. To serious. The moment Ethan saw him, a sense of dread settled over him. What happened? Tom removed his hat. It's Lucas. Fear shot through Ethan. What about him? Tom sighed. His case has been reviewed. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. And the state wants to transfer him to a long-term facility until adoption arrangements can be made. The room became silent. Lucas stood frozen. His face turned pale. What does that mean? The boy asked quietly. Tom looked uncomfortable. It means you will have to leave here. Lucas immediately looked toward Ethan. Pure fear filled his eyes. The same fear Ethan had seen the night they first met. The fear of being Alone. Again. Double quotes. No. Double quotes. The word escaped Ethan before he even realized it. Tom looked at him. Ethan. No. His voice became stronger. He's not leaving. The sheriff remained silent. Then asked the obvious question. Can you legally support him? Ethan didn't answer. Because he's COULD in single quotes T. Not yet. The house was still under foreclosure. His finances were a disaster. His future remained uncertain. The law didn't care about intentions. The law cared about stability. And Ethan had none. Tom sighed. You have 1 week. Then he left. The front door closed. Silence filled the house. Lucas stared at the floor. After a long moment he spoke. It's okay. Ethan looked at him. The boy forced a smile. A heartbreaking smile. I'll be okay. Ethan knew that smile. He had worn it himself for years. The smile people use when they're hurting too much to admit it. No, Ethan said softly. Lucas looked up. No what? No, you won't. The boy blinked. Ethan knelt beside him. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. Neither spoke. Then Ethan made a decision. The biggest decision of his life. I'm going to fight for you. The following days became a whirlwind. Meetings, paperwork, phone calls, interviews, lawyers, social workers. Every possible obstacle appeared. Many doubted Ethan, some politely, some openly. A struggling man facing foreclosure didn't seem like the ideal guardian, yet Ethan refused to quit. For the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for, someone worth fighting for, and that changed him. Rachel noticed it. Pastor Benjamin noticed it. Even Lucas noticed it. The man who had spent a decade hiding from life was finally stepping back into it. Then, just when everything seemed impossible, another surprise arrived. Rachel called late one evening. Ethan, yeah, I need you to come to the foundation tomorrow. Why? Her voice sounded excited. You'll see. The next morning. Ethan arrived confused. Rachel led him into a conference room. Several board members sat around a large table. Documents rested in front of them. Rachel smiled. We took a vote. A vote, she nodded. The board unanimously approved your appointment. Ethan frowned. Appointment to what? Rachel smiled wider. Executive Director of Sarah's Light Foundation. The room spun. What? The board members applauded. Ethan stared in disbelief. This is a joke. It isn't. Rachel slid a contract across the table. A full-time position, a salary. Benefits. Financial security. A future. For several moments, Ethan couldn't speak. The foreclosure notice. The debts. The uncertainty. Everything suddenly shifted. Not because of luck. Not because of magic, but because years earlier, a little girl had chosen kindness, and that kindness had continued growing long after her death. Rachel smiled. Your daughter gave people hope. She pointed toward the contract. Now it's your turn. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. For the first time in 10 years, he felt as though he could breathe again. 2 weeks later, the court hearing arrived. Lucas sat nervously beside Ethan. The boy barely spoke all morning. His hands shook. Ethan understood. This moment would decide everything. The hearing lasted less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Questions were asked. Documents reviewed. Recommendations presented. Finally, the judge leaned forward. The courtroom became silent. The judge smiled. Mr. Walker. Ethan stood. I have reviewed the evidence. His heart pounded. The judge continued. I have also reviewed testimony from the sheriff, social workers, community leaders, and the Sarah's Light Foundation. A pause. Then, it is the opinion of this court that Lucas's best interests are served by remaining with you. Lucas froze. The judge smiled. Temporary guardianship is approved. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Lucas realized what had happened. His eyes widened. Really? The judge laughed softly. Really? The boy immediately burst into tears. Ethan did too. Years of pain. Years of loneliness. Years of loss. And somehow, against every expectation, they had found each other. Not through chance. Not through luck. But through a storm. A storm that neither of them understood at the time. That night, they celebrated with Pastor Benjamin, Rachel, Emily, Sheriff Reynolds, and several friends from church. The small gathering filled Ethan's house with laughter. Real laughter. The kind he hadn't heard there since Sarah was alive. At one point, Ethan stepped outside onto the porch. The stars filled the sky. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Pastor Benjamin joined him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the pastor smiled. "You look different," Ethan laughed. "I feel different." Benjamin nodded. "I can see that." The old pastor looked toward the stars, then asked quietly, "Have you figured it out yet?" "Figured out what?" Benjamin smiled. The answer, Ethan thought for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I think so." The pastor waited. Ethan looked toward the house. Inside, Lucas laughed with friends. The sound carried into the night. Then Ethan looked upward, toward the stars, toward heaven, toward memories, toward Sarah. And finally he spoke. The miracle was never that God removed every problem. Benjamin smiled. Ethan continued. The miracle was that he never left. The old pastor's eyes filled with tears, because after 10 long years, Ethan Walker had finally found his faith again. 6 months pass. For the first time in more than a decade, Ethan Walker looked forward to the future. Life wasn't perfect. Problems still existed. Some days were difficult. Some nights were painful. Sarah was still gone. Nothing could ever change that. But grief no longer controlled him. It no longer defined him. Instead, something else had taken root in his heart. Purpose, hope, faith. The house that had once felt empty was now alive again. Lucas filled it with energy. Laughter. Noise. Life. Sometimes Ethan would come home from work and find shoes scattered across the hallway, backpacks tossed onto chairs, homework spread across the kitchen table. And every single time, he smiled. Because for years he had prayed for silence to end. Now it finally had. Sarah's Light Foundation continued to grow. Under Ethan's leadership, the organization expanded faster than anyone expected. New donors joined. New volunteers arrived. New programs launched. Children received medical assistance. Families received support. Communities came together. Every week Ethan heard stories that reminded him of Sarah. Stories of courage. Stories of kindness. Stories of people helping strangers. The very things Sarah had believed in. One afternoon Rachel entered Ethan's office carrying a thick folder. "Good news." Ethan laughed. "I like good news." Rachel placed the folder on his desk. The foundation helped more families this year than at any point in its history. Ethan opened the report. The numbers were astonishing. Thousands of lives touched. Millions of dollars raised. Dozens of children receiving life-saving treatment. For several moments he simply stared. Then Rachel smiled. "You know what my favorite part is?" "What?" She pointed toward a photograph attached to the report. A little girl, about 8 years old, smiling. Healthy. Alive. Rachel single quotes as voice softened. "Every child we help keeps Sarah's story alive." Ethan looked at the picture, then toward the framed photograph of Sarah sitting on his bookshelf. For years he had believed her story ended in tragedy. Now he understood something different. Her story had never ended. It continued every day. Through every life she inspired. That autumn brought another major change. Lucas officially became part of Ethan's family. The adoption hearing took place on a bright October morning. Friends from church filled the courtroom. Rachel and Emily attended. Sheriff Reynolds attended. Even Pastor Benjamin sat proudly in the front row. The judge reviewed the paperwork, asked a few questions, then smiled. "Lucas, do you wish to be adopted by Ethan Walker?" The boy didn't hesitate. Double quotes. "Yes, ma'am." The judge looked toward Ethan. "And Mr. Walker, do you wish to adopt Lucas?" Ethan felt emotion rising in his chest. He looked at the boy beside him, the boy who had appeared during a storm. The boy who had changed everything, the boy who had helped heal a broken heart. "Yes." His voice trembled. "More than anything." The judge smiled, then spoke the words everyone had been waiting to hear. "The adoption is approved." The courtroom erupted into applause. Lucas immediately hugged Ethan. Neither of them could stop crying. Neither wanted to. After everything they had endured, they had finally found a family. Not by blood, but by love. And sometimes that is even stronger. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Pastor Benjamin suffered a mild heart attack. Fortunately, he survived, but his doctors insisted he slow down. The old pastor reluctantly agreed. One Sunday morning he invited Ethan to visit him. They sat together inside the empty sanctuary of St. Michael's Church. The same church where Ethan had once arrived broken and hopeless. Benjamin smiled. You remember your first visit back here? Ethan laughed. And fortunately, you were angry. I was. Benjamin nodded. Very angry. They both laughed. The pastor looked around the sanctuary. Then his expression became thoughtful. I have a favor to ask. Ethan frowned. What kind of favor? Benjamin pointed toward the pulpit. I want you to speak next Sunday. Ethan nearly choked. No. Benjamin smiled. Yes. No chance. Absolutely. Ethan shook his head repeatedly. I don't preach. I'm not asking you to preach. The pastor's eyes softened. I'm asking you to tell the truth. The request terrified him. Yet over the following week, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, he agreed. The church was packed the following Sunday. People filled every pew. Word had spread throughout Cedar Creek. Many wanted to hear Ethan's story. As he stepped behind the pulpit, his hands trembled. He looked across the congregation. Families, friends, neighbors, people who had helped him when he didn't deserve it. People who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Then he began speaking. I spent 10 years angry at God. The sanctuary became completely silent. I blamed him for everything. He paused. For Sarah's death. For my failures. For my pain. He looked toward Lucas sitting in the front row. Then toward Rachel and Emily. Then toward Pastor Benjamin. For a long time, I thought faith meant getting answers. A few people nodded. But I was wrong. His voice grew stronger. Faith isn't always about answers. The congregation listened carefully. Sometimes faith is simply trusting that God is still present when life doesn't make sense. Silence. Then Ethan continued. I kept asking where God was during my darkest years. He smiled softly. Now I think I know. He pointed gently toward the congregation. He was here. People looked around, confused. Ethan continued. He was in the people who refused to give up on me. Tears appeared in many eyes. He was in a pastor who listened instead of judging. Double quotes. Benjamin lowered his head. He was in a frightened little boy standing alone during a storm. Lucas wiped away tears. He was in a daughter whose kindness continued changing lives long after she was gone. The entire church sat in silence, many crying openly, including Ethan. Then he spoke the final words of his message. The greatest miracle of my life wasn't that my problems disappeared. His voice trembled. The greatest miracle was discovering that God had been walking beside me the entire time. No one moved. No one spoke. The room felt filled with something sacred. Something powerful. Something impossible to describe. Years later, the town of Cedar Creek looked very different. Sarah's Light Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the state. Hundreds of children received help each year. Thousands of volunteers participated. Lives continued changing. Lucas grew into a remarkable young man. Kind. Compassionate. Strong. Much like Sarah had been. One summer afternoon, nearly 8 years after the storm, Ethan stood outside the Foundation's newest children's center. A large crowd gathered for the grand opening. Reporters, families. Community leaders. Volunteers. A bronze plaque stood near the entrance, covered by a small curtain. As everyone watched, Ethan stepped forward. His hair had begun turning gray. Lines marked his face, but his eyes were different now, peaceful. He pulled the cord. The curtain fell. The plaque was revealed. At the top were engraved words. Sarah Walker Children's Center. Beneath it was a quote taken directly from Sarah's journal. Help somebody else someday. That way the kindness keeps going. The crowd applauded. Many wiped away tears. Ethan looked toward the sky. For a moment, he imagined Sarah smiling. And somehow, he felt certain she was. That evening, after the celebration ended, Ethan sat alone on a bench outside the center. The sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. Lucas approached, now a young man. No longer the frightened child Ethan had found during the storm. He sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then Lucas smiled. You know something? What? I think Sarah would be proud. Ethan looked toward the fading sunlight, then smiled. Yeah. His voice was quiet, I think so too. The wind moved gently through the trees. The stars slowly appeared overhead. And for the first time in many years, Ethan felt complete. Not because life had been easy. Not because every prayer had been answered. Not because every wound had healed. But because he finally understood. Faith wasn't believing that nothing bad would ever happen. Faith was believing that even in the darkest storms, you never walk alone. And sometimes, the very thing that breaks your heart becomes the thing God uses to heal someone else's, including your own.